Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the YouTube channel Unspun Yarn. I'm so glad that everybody was able to make it today. I've got 2 out of my 4 guests today. Hopefully, we'll be having a third joining us shortly. To my right, I've got Dan from Voice of Geekdom. Hi, Dan. You want to introduce yourself?
Nessie. Yeah, I'm Dan from Voice of Geekdom. You said it already.
Right.
doing Tolkien content, mostly Silmarillion content at the moment on my channel. I've been a friend of the channel for a little while, so it's good to be doing some like proper content with you, Nessie, because we've known each other like a couple of months now. So yeah, I'm really excited to talk about dragons. And I like Tolkien's conception of dragons, so we'll get stuck into like his like kind of particular kind of brand of dragon. Should be cool.
Yeah, right on. And below me, we have the lovely Carol Brown. I'm so happy to have you on the channel today, Carol.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we haven't had a chance to work together before, and I was really, really excited that you were able to make it on today, despite work things trying to get in the way.
Definitely.
So, if you'd like to tell the people on the channel a little bit about yourself, that'd be great.
Sure. So I work with the Clueless Fangirl. We're doing a Lord of the Rings podcast, the Fellowship of the Bling. So we've done some recordings on that. And yeah, I love the title as well. And I moderate on a couple of YouTube channels, Because Geek and on Smokescreen. So mostly I am a fan of the topic and fan of high fantasy.
Awesome. All right. Well, I guess we can go ahead and just start digging into it, and hopefully our other guests will catch up with us. Unfortunately, our friend Helen is not going to be able to make it today. That was a big bummer, but she's got some not to dox her or anything, but she had some personal things going on today, so she wasn't going to be able to join us it was kind of last minute. So we'll get her on again real soon. So anyway, so I thought we could just start out with like giving everybody like an overview of some of the main dragons that appear in Tolkien's works. Dan, I think you and Helen have recently done a stream specifically on Glaurung. If you would like to go ahead and start.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, as you say, we on Helen's channel on the Clueless Fangirl channel, we did about a 2-hour pre-recorded stream where we talked about Glaurung. So if you want a real in-depth discussion on that, look that up. But yeah, Glaurung is the first dragon that appears in Middle-earth. He appears in the Silmarillion and in the Children of Húrin, which is one of the 3 great tales. The Silmarillion, for those who don't know, is largely set in the first age of Middle-earth. And Glaurung, the dragon, he was created by Morgoth, who was kind of Sauron's boss, for those who don't know the Silmarillion. Incidentally, if you don't know the Silmarillion, I'm also covering it, so plug. But and I'll get to that. Stephen Stark has agreed to voice Glaurung in my series that I'm doing on the Silmarillion, so you'll find out all about him in the coming months, hopefully. But yes, he was the first dragon, and he's kind of described as being well, he's a flightless dragon. He doesn't have wings. And he's kind of he's the proto dragon, and he's described as being kind of bred in the pits of Angband, which is Morgoth's lair. And we don't quite know his like full origin story because it's a secret known only to Tolkien.
Right.
Which is an interesting kind of thing to dig into, which is what Helen and I spent a long time talking about, because it's like it's a mystery, but also if you look at the kind of mythological underpinnings of the story, there's some clues there potentially.
Right on, yeah. And he's also called the Deceiver. Is that correct? That his eponym.
Yeah, that's one of his monikers. Yeah, he's kind of like a gold king. All of Tolkien's dragons have this kind of fascination with gold. And obviously everybody probably knows the Hobbit story, and you see that with Smaug as well. And there are quite a lot of parallels between Glaurung Smaug. They're quite similar characters in a lot of ways, very devious and malevolent, and they both have this kind of power of their voice and their eyes to hold you in a spell. Glaurung is he's one of the major probably the major antagonist of the Children of Húrin story, which is the story of Turin Turambar, who was a mortal man in the First Age who had a curse put on him by Morgoth, and kind of he's the antagonist who basically he drives Turin towards this tragic end, and it's a wonderful end of the story, and it parallels quite closely the tale of Fafnir from Norse mythology.
Mm-hmm.
With him having the moniker the Deceiver, that really lends into how he I say he, we don't know he, but I assume he.
I think all of Tolkien's dragons are assumed to be male.
Presumed male. How, like you say, they use their voice and their beguilement, their bewitchment. Both Smaug and Glaurung are the only two dragons, if I'm remembering correctly, that have what you would call like speaking parts in the story. The rest of them are just kind of like mentioned along the way, but these two actually have interactions with the characters. And
there's 4 named dragons that I'm aware of. I don't know if Carol, if you know of any others, but there's these 2 which have speaking parts in major storylines, and then there is and Calogon the Black, who's kind of the big boss fight at the end of the Silmarillion, but he doesn't speak.
He's the biggest of the winged drakes and fire breathers.
Exactly.
We'll get to him too.
And then later on, there's another dragon which is mentioned briefly in the appendices of the Lord of the Rings, which is Scatha, the long worm, he's called. But we don't know. We don't know too much about him. He's just an historical reference, really. There's where do we go from here? Somebody lead me.
Then there's Smaug, my buddy.
Your buddy.
And because I love Smaug. And then there's a Ghostir, who was one of the dragons of Morgoth, but you don't really know much about him other than, Morgoth had a little pet dragon, and his name was Ghostir. And then there was in one of the Hobbit, I guess, poems or verses, there was an unnamed dragon that was red and black that is referenced. But those are the main dragons that you kind of hear speak to. It was inferred that there were many drakes at one point, but these are the main ones that get focused on. Yeah.
By the time of the Lord of the Rings, or by the Hobbit, really, most of them are dead.
By the Third Age. Yeah.
And that was
mostly the last one,
due to the war between the dragons and the dwarves over the hordes, so to speak, the battle of the hordes.
Interesting because
and also the Eotheod as well. The ancestors of the Rohirrim were involved in some of those wars as well.
And that was Scatha was affiliated with that because Fram killed Scatha in that particular dust up. So it's like each of the tribes of the earth somehow got touched by a dragon, and each of those dragons came to their ends by the dealings with, or the conflicts with those people. They just didn't quite get along with everybody. They were, hey, you got gold. I'm going to come over here.
Well, I mean, Tolkien dragons aren't really like the warm, cuddly kind of, you want to have them hanging around kind of dragons. They're generally causing like a lot of mayhem, and they do things like burn your crops and burn your fields, and
they only do that when you come into their acquirement and take a cup. Then they're like, we gonna have words.
And that really comes back. That's a big Beowulf callback there. All right, so we start out with Glaurung, and one we didn't mention right off was the Beast of Gondolin. That's another big baddie from the First Age. He wasn't named, but apparently, according to the name Gondolin, he was very much involved in the fall of Gondolin, which I think John and Helen covered on Helen's channel. It's a shame that those two aren't here because
Yeah.
as we're talking about them, but I'm hoping John will pop in anytime now.
The dragons that were involved in the fall of Gondolin were Glaurung's children.
Yes.
Also
So,
not winged, correct?
Don't believe so.
I don't think so either.
Believe
No.
they had flight. I
They
think the
haven't
only
evolved
two
to
that were
point.
flight were Smaug and Calagon.
I on the stream that I did with Helen, I talked a lot about this is my term for it, is the evil R&D department, I call it, which is like you can imagine them kind of like brainstorming ideas in Angband in the pits
Chink, chink.
yeah, like they've got like a whiteboard with post-it notes and
Wait on that one.
then all of a sudden someone's going, wouldn't it be cool if we gave them wings? Like,
what if we gave them wings? What if we...
That could be a problem. They're burning up from the air. Let's make the next one take the wings off.
Yeah, like we've got these cities with these really high walls. They're really difficult to get into, from the ground. Hey, let's call it an airstrike. That's great. Let's do that.
And it was interesting because I believe it's in The Hobbit. Yes, it's in The Hobbit because they were talking about the great enemy, because Sauron had been vanquished at one point with the early ages, with where Elrond comes into play and Isildur and all of that.
The Last Alliance, yeah.
Yes, the Last Alliance. So when they were talking and Smaug was around, Gandalf and was talking to Thranduil and saying, dude, I know you're not too fond of the dwarves, and I know you're tolerating men because y'all have this, Trader Joe's things going. Y'all make stuff, send it down there, they pay you, and you're great. But if the great enemy gets hold of Smaug and they make a deal, we're all going to have a bad day. Because the last time anything like this happened, it was with Morgoth and friends. And it was not pleasant. So we don't have the Vyar here to help us, get people in line. So please help us do this, because if Smaug decides, because Smaug has to decide, which is different than how George R.R. Martin portrays his dragons.
Correct.
Because their dragons are just, intelligent, smart. They're bonded with the Targaryens, but there's no implication of,
there's no sapient thought, is there? It's
they're not sitting there.
They're very intelligent animals, but they're not. They are animals.
They're not reading Dragon Times, going, you know what, my cousin,
make a deal.
Something happened. Let me pack my little dragon bag and fly up here, and we're gonna dust up.
And they're not collecting vast hoards of jewelry
to get a better deal, right? They're not making deals on their own with like the faceless men.
Exactly.
Or I see where you're going there. Yeah.
Exactly. As far as we know, anyway.
So they definitely wanted to figure out what to do about Smaug quickly, because if what they thought was coming, if it came and saw this, Sauron was around when Morgoth was doing all this stuff, but Sauron was in the back, in the corner, not in the main frame, looking at this. So Morgoth was front and center. He was using his, our evil R&D versions. Oh, let's throw a non-winged one. Hey, let's do a winged one. Let's do a long one. Let's do some with wings and only 2 legs. Let's do this. We don't want this one to get in the middle of this, because that battle would then become 80 times harder.
Exponentially much more powerful of an army to have to deal with. With the Nazgul and the Fellbeast, he already had, air cover, but they didn't breathe fire. They could not decimate, massive amounts of ground troops from the air, just burn them alive. So that's
you're absolutely right,
very
because they were dealing with a war with similar technology. Yes, they had the Nazgul, but the Nazgul weren't there all the time. So if you're dealing with orcs, Uruk-hai, dwarves, men, whomever, elves, at least you were sword to sword, trying to hopefully have this battle. But you drop a fire-breathing dragon in the middle of that, it's just going to be a bad day.
Right. Yeah. Good point. Very good point. So, let's see. Did you want to go ahead and get into Smaug a little bit, or would you like to just kind of kick around with, let's see.
Well, kind of
Well,
to pull
do you
a
want to?
thread with the dwarves, I thought it was interesting that the gnomish or dwarvish word for dragon had to do with the fact that they hoard. And it's interesting because dwarves are doing the same thing. They were finding things, crafting things, hoarding things. And it's
They're
interesting
like
how
natural enemies just in the way that they're created and their habits and what have you. That's very true.
They're frenemies, aren't
indeed, because
Yeah.
dwarves are a little grumpy. They're not naturally disposed to partner up with folks unless there is a economic benefit for some, not all. But as soon as you started adding this whole thing of the hoard of gold, the dwarves were like, nope, that's mine. And the dragons were, haha, it was. And hijinks ensued.
Right. That is kind of like the main, I mean, if you want to say character difference between the two, is that dragons don't make, dragons take.
Yes.
Dwarves make, dragons take. So, and hence comes
Yeah.
the conflict, because they're like, yeah, that's really nice and shiny. Thank you
I'll
very
have
much.
that.
Oh, and I'll take all this too.
Let me just move you out of the way and I'll take your home.
Yeah. So there's like the great hordes that they acquired during the the Dwarven and Dragon Wars. There were what, 7 hordes or 9, I think.
I don't remember.
There's 7 clans of dwarves.
There's 7, so there were 7
Yeah.
hordes of gold.
Hence why there are 7 rings of power as well.
Right.
For the dwarves, yeah.
That's it. And each one of those hordes, if I remember correctly, were built upon one of those rings of power. At the heart of the horde was, or the start or the heart of the horde was, one of the dwarven rings of power, because isn't that how the dwarves were acquiring and gathering so much wealth? Was through, not through the influence of it, but because Sauron could not control them. It just kind of turned their acquisition up to 11, so to speak.
Well, the greed of the dwarves it is partly rooted in the rings of power in the later ages, the second and third ages, but also with the dwarves, they weren't created by the same creator as the elves and men were. So they were created by Aule the Smith, who was one of the Valar, whereas the elves and men were created by the omnipotent, all-powerful, Yahweh figure. And they were created by the Smith, so they were created in his image in a way, and he was the kind of trying to think of the right word here, but he was like the keeper, and he was the smith, and he was in charge of the element of earth and rock and stone and metal and precious things that come from the earth. And because he was the smith, his kind of whole deal was creating things. He was also very close with the Noldor elves, who were the deep elves, who were in the early works of Tolkien. They were referred to as the gnomes, and Gnomish was their language, and then that later became Quenya, and then it evolved into something else. And that was in the sort of early drafts of the Silmarillion. He was close with them, and they were also close with the dwarves. So in the Second Age, there was a kingdom of the Noldor which set up close to Moria, which Lord of the Rings fans will know, and that was Celebrimbor's people, and he was the guy who forged the Rings of Power.
Who was tricked into doing this because, again, it's interesting. Nessie, to go back to your point about the dragons, and Dan's yours as well. They were imbued with this seductiveness via their words and their looks. And Melkor was a sweet talker, and he was influencing conflict through his words and through his gift of persuasion. And the dwarves on the other side, because Aule was not somebody who was like, what are you talking about? Go away. Behave yourself. So the dwarves were much more grounded, rooted, pardon the pun, in, factual things, but they were very quick to be angered. And it was almost as if the children of Melkor, if you will, were particularly given attributes that were going to irk these dwarves because Eru told them, don't make stuff. I have a script. There's music. We're going to do this. Follow the script, follow the music. Melkor kept throwing temper tantrums and tearing stuff up and blowing things up and going down to Middle Earth or Earth and causing all kinds of issues. So when Aule created his beings,
children,
Ader came down and said, "What are you doing?" And Aule's wife was like, "Ugh, fine, great." But the thing is that, Eru saw the dwells rear back in fear, and he was like, okay, well, they're here now. Put them to sleep. When everybody else wakes up, we'll re-wake them up. Now, Melkor heard this, and he caught nothing but grief because everything he made was only to serve his purpose, only for his get, only for his entertainment, which is kind of interesting and very similar to the Michael and the Lucifer stories. So
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
You very much see Melkor almost angry. And I wonder, though I'm trying to place within the Silmarillion, and I can't find it or recall it, where perhaps Melkor also imbued his irritation with the dwarves because his were sanctioned, if you will, and his were not. Melkor also could not stand the Noldor because they seemed to be the favorites. And Helen and I have waxed, rhapsodic over, oh, I like to slap Fëanor because he just needed to be slapped. And he got played, and Melkor kept, plucking at him, and his paranoia and his craft, because he crafted the Cimmerals, which were stunning, and he could never craft them again. And then Melkor wanted them, so hence that I want to have things and I want to take things. I'm wondering if those attributes somehow ended up in the dragons, because that's like Dragon 101. Pretty, shiny, beautiful things want that. I must have that, and I will move you out of the way. Mine. Oh, excuse me, I was living there. Do you want me to burn you? Move on. And if I don't breathe fire, you're a snack. Move on.
The thing about the lust for gold, it could also be bred into them in order to control them. Because, I mean, Morgoth has, I'll use the word Morgoth, but we're talking about Morgoth and Melkor as the same person, in case anybody listening doesn't know that. He does have fears of certain allies, doesn't he? We see that with Ungoliant, where he has this ally for a little while who's a giant spider who was Shelob's mother, ancestor, whatever. And she becomes too powerful for him, and he actually shows fear in that moment. And I think with the dragons, he has to have a means of controlling them. That would be my speculation on the gold lust thing. But there is also that parallel with the dwarves, and that goes back to obviously the Norse underpinnings of the whole kind of staple of Tolkien's dragons. I think we'll get more into that in the second half of this, so I don't want to go too much into that one. But yeah.
So that need for acquisition, as you were saying, Carol, you think it's also a means of control, because say a dragon's not going to leave its hoard unless somebody comes and
irritates them.
It irritates them. So he knows Melkor knows within the dragon, this weapon of mass destruction is going to stay within a certain area. It's not going to go fly off and wander away. So he knows kind of where it is kind of at all times because he knows where where the horde is.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
Where the horde is, where the dragon is.
if we pick up with the story of Glaurung there, there's a good example there, because what happens is he first comes on the scene very early, and he escapes his bonds too early, and he's not quite fully grown yet, and
Right.
Put a pin in that one.
and exactly, like just be patient. But he basically escapes, and he gets driven back by the elves. And then later on, he is fully grown and he's released at the right moment. But the elves and the dwarves are able to counter him to an extent because they have that preview of
The cat
what they're up
came
against.
out of the bag too soon.
Yeah. If he'd come out and it had been a complete surprise in the Dagor Bragalak, the Battle of Sudden Flame, you could imagine like all of Beleriand being completely conquered in one fell move. But what happens later on in the Children of Húrin story is that Glaurung goes to the caves of Nargothrond, which are one of the houses of the Noldor, which is the house of the Noldor that Galadriel is also from, for Lord of the Rings fans. She's not there in this story, but there's a gold hoard there, and he settles down there, and that becomes his little kingdom for a few years. And that gold lust is, that's what keeps him there for a while, at least. But he's also very, very connected to Morgoth, and he kind of takes his, missions from the boss, but it's part of his character to hoard and keep hold of that gold and maintain that outpost.
Yeah,
sorry, Nessie, go ahead.
That's fine. By he being called like the father of dragons, he was Morgoth's first creation. He probably is the one who is the most connected with him, having been imbued with as much of his essence or creative. He was probably more hands-on with that creation, if we're being honest, because that was the first.
And he took that one down to the depths of Angband, because when he was first causing destruction and tearing up Middle Earth,
just like any teenager,
everyone could see what he was doing. Put that back. So he got smacked around and was drawn, driven off and put into ultimate timeout, and had to pretend that he was, remorseful, and then gets back out and really shows his butt, and then runs to Middle Earth and says, yeah, nah. So when he's making these dragons, they're in the deep basement of his home, so that no one can see, no one can know. And kind of to your point, it was almost a foreshadowing for Sauron, because with the Ring of Power in it, he imbued his malice, his hate, his desire to control, to enslave, and all of this. With Melkor, I almost want to say that his focus was almost like a toddler, very narrow. Ooh, shiny thing, it's right in front of me. Whereas Sauron was thinking much more strategically and global takeover. Melkor was still trying to piss off Dad.
He was just mad at Dad.
He was mad at Dad. So I'm going to do these things to tick you off. And I got something for you, Owlay, and I'm going to come over there with you little Noldor, and it's coming.
Sibling rivalry and just daddy issues, like from Jump Street.
All day long. So to me, Melkor. So, I mean, he was smart to create, the Drake. He probably, with, the later versions, added the wings, which gave so much more destructive power. But, this was his first puppy. He loved him. His little pupper. He sent him out in the world and just sat there and encouraged bad behavior. So there are no bad dragons. They're just bad dragon maker people thing. Yeah.
imbuers with power.
That's it.
So when he did go out, when Glaurung did go out the first time, we do find out that dragons do kind of have a somewhat of a weakness, because he came out before he had reached his full potential, so to speak. His armor hadn't really
Hardened.
his scale hadn't hardened. So we find out there that it takes time and years upon years upon years for these dragons to come into their power. So younger dragons like Smaug, they will have like a weak spots, which
they're very vulnerable.
They have a vulnerability like that Achilles heel, if you're able to find it. So I think that was kind of a neat little clue that he put there in the Silmarillion to kind of I don't know if it was like a retcon for the story, from
or
the
did
Hobbit.
Christopher put it in maybe?
Or did maybe Christopher put that little bit of, hey, it didn't work because, his scales weren't hardened yet, or he hadn't come into his full power, as young dragons do.
And it's interesting because now Glaurung was a fire drake who didn't fly, but there's also some thought that in addition to the armor needing to form the plates to like a soft shell crab, it's like if you're going to have this exoskeleton, it when you're upon birth, it's soft so that you can move around and it can shed and you can grow and it can get bigger, and then eventually it hardens and the plates come together. But I'm wondering, does the ability to breathe fire also come with maturity? So Glaurung getting away, he was extremely vulnerable on many fronts because all those skills weren't quite, turned on. I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's possible, and it's not maybe not specific to Tolkien's legendary, but that is kind of like a canon in other dragon legendary
lore.
Yeah, dragon lore, like say Dragon Riders of Pern. It takes a while for them to build up their ability to flame. So it's something that does come with age and maturity. They might have like a smaller flame, but to get the really powerful flame, from just take the Asquith dragons, Daenerys's dragons, when they're babies, they're
not quite there yet.
Not quite there yet.
They sort of burp little firecrackers, don't they?
Yeah. They're not quite flying very far.
Birthday cakes and things like that, or your occasional wizard robe or what have you. But yeah, you wouldn't want to take them into battle.
The chat is loving your cat in the background.
That
might lead me into another kind of segue into another one of the influences behind the dragons that I think is cats. Because Tolkien had this real big thing about cats, and you see it in particular with Smaug in a couple of instances, where Bilbo is creeping down the secret tunnel, the secret entrance into Erebor, and he's got Balin with him, and then Balin stops and he goes on and he creeps towards the door with his hobbit stealth. And then he hears this noise, this almighty noise, and it's described in the narrative as being like a tomcat purring, there's a couple of other similes that he uses, like a boiling kettle or something, I think. So that's a parallel there in the narrative, in the description. And then the second time when he goes in, after stealing the cup and coming out and then going back in, the second time he goes in, Smaug is feigning sleep, and he's pretending to be asleep, and he's got his eyes half open, which again is a cat reference. It's like it's inspired deliberately by cats. And Tolkien had this thing about cats, which you notice like over and over again. The original conception of Sauron was a giant like evil cat. Called I've forgotten the name. Begins with a T. Do you remember, Carol?
No, I do not.
That's amazing. I love it.
So it was this was in the original story of the Beren and Luthien story. And for those who know that story, you'll remember there's a hound called Juan.
Yeah,
Spanish hound, and he and he has a big fight with Sauron, and it's like a cat versus dog thing, which is pretty cool. But there's lots of instances. Stuff with Gollum as well. That's in like some of his mannerisms are inspired by cats as well. So it's really weird that he had this like real hang up about cats, about them being evil.
It's interesting that you say that too, Dan, because one of the Stephen mentioned this on. Well, he asked this or brought it up on one of my earlier streams on dragons. Was it one of the
Tevildo?
One of the three.
That's the name. Tevildo.
Tevildo, yeah.
3 predators that were like our ancestors were like the most afraid of, or what have you, were like a serpent,
yep,
a bird like an eagle, a flying, a crawling, and like giant cats like panthers and lions and whatnot. And those 3 great predators were what kind of formed in the back of us, back of our little monkey brain to like produce the dragon from. So that was one theory about where the that concept.
Yeah, I think for Tolkien the sort of connection with the Mesopotamian half cat, half eagle kind of dragon is unconscious. I think it's unconscious on Tolkien's level because he was very much inspired by the Norse dragons, the Germanic dragons.
And old wives' tales said, don't have cats around babies, because they'll steal their breath or they'll lay on top of the baby and smother the baby. And I'm like, that cat's not pressed about that baby unless the baby grabs its tail. Cat's just sitting there chilling.
Yeah, they eat and sleep and shit, and that's what they do.
Yeah, and lick themselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
What they do. And judge us. Just judge us.
I'm not eating that. No.
Cats and felines, they're really, they're apex predators. This one might not look like it, but she's like a mouser. She'll bring me presents. My indoor outdoor is like, he'll bring large prey, just drag it home. Half of his size. He'll just, here, Mom, here's a rabbit. Hope you enjoy. But yeah, cats are felines are very, very much apex predators. So I can see how an apex predator like a dragon would have a lot of feline type mannerisms. And even how you guys talked about the animated Hobbit last week.
Yes, we did, didn't we? Don't remind us. John's not here, so we can talk all the shit about it that we want now.
I'm just going by the images that they had of Smaug, and it was
a cat.
Could notice quite a bit of feline in that. So I picked up on that, and I'm not the expert. So
grumpy cat.
Yeah, like a weird cat wolf thing with a long neck and laser beams coming out of his eyes.
It had fur a little bit. I'm like,
and whiskers.
And whiskers.
Round face, very
ears. So there was a lot of cat in that. And there was a lot of cat in that dragon. Okay. So a dragon is a cat. Go ahead and add that to the list of things that can be dragons.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay. Did we want to? Oh, yes. One thing that I wanted to talk about. So we had discussed earlier about the hordes and when the dwarven hordes and with the rings of power and whatnot. I believe I read that there were 4 of those dwarven rings that were actually consumed by by 4 of these. Obviously 4. One didn't. I don't think one had more than one, but anyway, by 4 of the dragons. So, and Sauron went to great efforts to reobtain. I think he was able to reobtain 2 of those 4 rings. And I'm wondering, what your guys' thoughts were on that, because they obviously didn't really work on the dwarves. Why do you think Sauron was so hell bent to get those 4 rings back?
Or did they? Did they work, but maybe not in ways expected?
Yeah, what are your thoughts on that? I thought that was a very interesting little tidbit to pull out of the, pull out of the story.
Well, for me, Sauron had time and observance of the issues of what was it, the Menegroth and a couple of other realms that fell, and it was a dwarf that brought it down. There were things that were affected on a dwarf that were more having to do with acquire and to keep, shiny
Right.
things. And it could be that, again, Morgoth being very, Melkor being very focused on, he just wanted to do this one or two things to please himself. Sauron had the benefit of looking at this again from a larger perspective. Maybe he realized that those rings, he needed them to reinforce power, to adjust them, to
Because I
be able
think
to
he even
control the
tried to like
dwarves.
re-gift them. Didn't
Hmm?
he try to re-gift? Didn't he even try to re-gift them at one point? Like the 2 of the 4 that he had
Yes, he in the
acquired?
Council of Elrond chapter in the Lord of the Rings,
Yeah.
we hear from Glowin, from the Hobbit, Gimli's dad, and he comes with news from the Lonely Mountain, and he says that a messenger from Mordor came up there and basically was looking for information about Baggins. And how do we find this Baggins? And one of the things he offers is giving back, I think, 2 of the dwarven rings. So yeah, exactly.
So
So
among other
the
things,
dwarves still want these rings back.
they still want them back, even though
Well,
they're kind of like.
There's a whole tale about Thorin's grandfather in Unfinished Tales, where he goes looking for the ring, and he goes to Dol Guldur, which is the fortress of Sauron at that time in the south of Mirkwood, which is mentioned in The Hobbit.
right.
And that was years before the tale of The Hobbit, but it was part of the backstory that Tolkien wrote later on.
I'm wondering if the dwarves valued the rings not for and not in the intent that Sauron intended, but maybe it was proof of leadership. If I have this ring, I'm the rightful king of this horde. It was the same thing with I keep wanting it to call a Cimmeral, and it's not the Arkenstone, because that was the king's stone. But Thorin's father was sitting on that throne already, and very likely imbued with this ring. I'm wondering if the ring heightened that need to hoard. And again, they're not trying to come out of the mountain to fight anybody's battles. They're in there trying to get more and more things. So just like at Moria, did the dwarves delve too deep because they just became obsessed with getting more and more things? Did the ring amplify that, or was that just a natural behavior, of the dwarves? I don't know.
It definitely was a natural behavior because of their connection to Aule, and we get that in the Silmarillion quite clearly. But
Aule wasn't one to. He created things for the beauty of it. They created beautiful things. But in the midst of their carving stone and working earth and moving, mountains and creating these strong halls, they bumped into these jewels and these precious metals, and it just became this whole other thing. So that attribute of the dwarves, I'm just curious as to where that came from, because that was not Aule at all.
And it could have been part of the influence from the dwarven rings that it just kind of tweaked their natural inclinations instead of like taking them over to control them, just kind of pushed their little buttons out of alignment a little bit, like a little, just to weigh the scale just a little bit more into the acquisition phase instead of the creation phase.
Because definitely having
you build
these
a giant hoard on top of it because gold begets gold. You have
gold
to have
begets gold. And indeed, and the deeper that they were delving, you were maybe getting closer and closer to where the fire drakes, live, definitely down there where the Balrogs were. And, they got irritated. You're up there, I'm down here. Why are you here? Okay, let me come up out the basement and argue with these neighbors because you're making all this noise. But just thinking of the locations of where the dragons are, is it more so, with the exception of Angband, it seems to be more so where they're going to get stuff, not where they were birthed or lived. So you wonder, did all dragons come from the deep places in the earth where the core and the fire and the lava and all of that natural um, uh, destructive but creative forces? Because fire is a great equalizer because it destroys and it causes growth at the same time. That's why when forest fires happen in natural environments, not artificially made, it clears out that brush, makes room for sunlight, and then more trees grow and fill in. But these dragons never were imbued with any kind of creationism. They were only powered with, you go destroy, but you can have that. And if I need you, the deal is you come out here. And I don't know if Morgoth went in there and said, hey, he stole a cup. What? I must go burn villagers, and wars would ensue. But those weaknesses was because the dragons were very self-absorbed, as eventually became some of the dwarves, the kings at least, with those rings.
With those rings. Yeah. Very good point, Carol. All right, we're right here at about the halfway point. So I thought I would just take a minute to thank everybody who's here. I appreciate each and every one of you for showing up and listening to us ramble on about some of our favorite things. So I just really do deeply appreciate each and every one of you for showing up, week after week. I don't have any patrons. That's fine. I don't intend to have a patron, so no patron shout outs. But I'll just, shout out a few people who are our regulars. We've got Lady Leaf Underhill. She's here always front and center. We've got Aaron M here in the chat. Here Be Dragons. Who's that guy? Never heard of that one. Forrest the Fox. Amy L. Oh, Voice of Geekdom. Who's that? Micah Clark. Micah, glad you could make it. Sontavia Major, girl, good to see you here. Bernie L. Chrissy of Old Stones. And let's see if we've got any. Geordie Jedi. Yeah, Geordie Jedi. Hi.
We've got CB DC Diva.
I don't know who that is.
Oh.
That's another new one. Oh, Lady Shar's here. Hi, Shar. Danny McKay. And if I've missed anybody, Emma. Hi, Emma. Emma was here. I think Emma's left.
I think she left already, but she popped in for a little while.
Laura 7 Ann is here. And let's see, go up a little further. Make sure I didn't
Dragon says that you haven't mentioned the most important dragon, the green dragon bar.
I was thinking that, yeah.
The green dragon
bar. How could we forget the pub?
Hey, Chrissy of Old Stones.
Yeah. Oh. And of course, we have Hot Doggington.
Yes, we had a question earlier. Is a dragon a hot dog?
A dragon.
What is the hot dog thing?
What is the genesis of the hot dog questions?
Well, it started off as a question that Stephen asked in a chat one day. Was, we were just in another chat, as we do, just typing along, and he posed the question: was a hot dog a sandwich? And so that's been like the running thing. The hot dog, is it a hot dog? Is it a sandwich?
It took over the whole chat, from what I'm told. The rest of that stream just focused on that, essential question.
It was fairly.
We like to focus on the deep issues in this fandom.
These are important things.
So when I did my dragon stream with Sandrixian, she shared one of her childhood stories that she drew a dragon that was shaped like a hot dog. It was like in a hot dog bun. Hot dog dragon. And she posted it in our Slack group. Yes, for anybody who's interested, we have a Slack group. and these two guys are in it, and most of the people that are in the chat are in it. So if you would like to be in it as well, contact either myself, Stephen Stark, or John Webster Film on Twitter, or you can drop a request in the description, or we actually have an official email. It's called we3dragons@gmail.com. You can send your request through there, and we'll look you up. So anyway, yes, we sometimes get weird Sandrixian artwork dropped in our chats, or we share lots of things about, ourselves. We have a virtual bar that, we hang out in till all hours of the morning. Sometimes we do Zoom chats. We have movie nights. We argue about stupid things. Argue meaning spirited discussions.
Spirited.
Very spirited discussions. Thank you for dropping that link, Stephen.
Bernie says it's a perpetual YouTube chat. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Pretty much. Yeah. If you enjoy what you're doing right now and you'd like to continue doing that off and on or around the clock or however you want. Yeah. So, all right. Anyway, thanks, guys. So back to this. I figured, okay, we can go ahead and start digging into where. Oh, yeah, Danny brought up the most important thing is the polls that Amy L. drops in, wanting to know, specifics about everything. Apparently, she loves raw data gathering, and that's like her favorite thing to do.
She says all the polls.
All the polls.
Has crafted music. We three dragons of Orient are. No, I'm not singing that. I'm not singing that part, Bernie.
I'm
not singing that part.
So everybody can see that. Thank you, Bernie. Thank you. And this is why we keep Bernie around, among other things. So I figured, like, in the second half, we could go ahead and dig into the influences that Tolkien had when he was creating his legendary, because he didn't just pull all of this stuff out of thin air. The guy was, obviously, yes, he may have pulled even his language, he like borrowed in bits and bobs and pieces. So it's kind of the same thing when he's going to make his dragons, that he's going to pull from real world legends and mythology and things of this nature. So I think we could,
let's talk about that. But I do want to pick up with a bit about the Green Dragon pub, actually, because although it's not an actual dragon, it is interesting that the hobbits have these legends about the dragons, and we know from the books as well that the hobbits migrated west in the course of their history. So sort of roughly halfway through the third age, they settle in the Shire. But before that, early on in the third age, they lived up north, right where the dragons were. And if you look at the Hobbit, and especially if you look at like things that Bilbo says. Hey, John.
Hey, I want to apologize, guys. My internet just completely crapped out in my house, so I couldn't even contact you guys. I feel really bad about that. So, apologies.
Well, it's all good, John. It's all good. You're here now. You're here for the second half.
Good.
You missed all the other stuff, though. All the Tolkien stuff. You just plumb missed it. We're just going to talk about random stuff now.
Okay. Cool.
And hot dogs.
Oh boy.
So yeah, I'm trolling you, John. I'm trolling you. Go ahead, Dan.
I was almost done really with the point, but it's just interesting that the hobbits have these legends, and that you get this sense of like this lost history of the hobbits, and that they have legends about dragons, and Bilbo had heard stories about dragons in the Hobbit, far-fetched like fairy tale stories, but it's kind of like it's interesting to note. Yeah.
And I mentioned
there's more to hobbits than meets the eye,
Right, because I had mentioned in my stream that I did with Emma about the poem, the Oliphant poem, which there's no elephants running around the Shire either. They got this somewhere from somewhere else. So they have a rich and very deep history that, you know,
Hmm.
there's more than just hairy little toes.
Well, that also means that there were other hobbits that did adventures, because
Correct.
hobbits are really good at the written history, writing it all down, capturing it. So at some point in time, there was some hobbit before Samwise Gamgee who ran across, a heffalump and a woozle, and then came home and wrote about it. And, more than Bilbo who saw a dragon. And
Mhm.
even when Frodo comes by later and says, "Hey, Bilbo, it's a dragon," there haven't been dragons around here, and whatever an age, and then all of those stories and all of those things and all of those considerations. But no one seems to ever say, if you ever notice in the storytelling, dragon, what is that? That's something made up. Everyone knows at some point there was one, and everyone's going, please don't bring that back. We don't want to do that again, because that will just get ugly.
Yeah, that
And
was a
even
bad idea.
when all of the elves in the Third Age know of the Balrog, even though a Balrog hasn't been seen, and even in the reaction in the elves, it must have been bad times,
Oh yeah.
because you even mention a Balrog, they all are like, no, 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 no. We do not want to do that again. So
Yeah.
there's definitely that respect of the past and the sharing of the knowledge that definitely is happening there. But I agree with you, Dan. I wonder what the early tales, because I need to go through my set of lost tales and see if any of that's picked up.
Of the
This is
hobbits.
this is a side note, but I did want to just mention, because you just mentioned about the Balrog and the elves, sort of, um, they don't even want to touch that subject. And there's a great moment in the Fellowship of the Ring film, which is, it's sort of, it goes by really quick. It's almost underplayed, where they're in Moria and Gandalf says, it's or Boromir says, "What is this new devilry?" And Gandalf says, "A Balrog." And it cuts to a shot of Legolas.
His whole
And
face.
he is freaking terrified. Doesn't say a word, but you can see the look in his eyes. And it's such a great moment. And
Well, is it Celeborn? Um, when they go into the woods outside of Moria, and they tell them, "Well, where's Gandalf? He was taken by fire and flame. He was felled by a Balrog of Morgoth." And even their faces are like, "There's another one,"
yeah,
type of thing. So there are definitely things under their beds,
Yeah,
that even
Celeborn
something
was
as
around in the
powerful, there's
First Age
always
as well.
something more powerful. And Dan, to an earlier point that you raised, because it's one of my favorite parts of the Silmarillion, is Morgoth is walking around like, "I'm bad, I'm causing trouble, nobody knows what I'm doing, ha ha," and he makes this deal with Ungoliant, however that's pronounced. This spider is a Maiar. This
Mhm.
spider, in and of herself, has power, has influence, has value, and Morgoth, Melkor, thought he was going to just pat the spider on their many little heads and say, "Hey, come do this deal, blah, blah, blah." And the reason why he shows fear is because Ungoliant is looking at him like, "Oh, you're going to feed me? I'll play along." And
Mhm.
he fell into that sense of complacency and thinking, "Yeah, you're just a stupid spider or whatever, you're beneath
Right.
me."
Yeah, that animalism just
That
kind of led
animalism,
to. Mhm.
until he was like, "Yeah, I think I want to keep these trees. I'm gonna do this thing on my own." And Ungoliant was like,
Oh
"Okay,
no,
I'm eating those trees. What do you have in your hand? What is that?"
you look like a.
Um, it's a cimmeril, but you don't want this. Let me give you the fruit. Now I want that too. I want all of this. So even Melkor had something that scared the crap out of him, that he thought he could control and he could not control. Sauron, interestingly, learned from that. And everything with the forging of those rings, having Celebrimbor making his and forging his rings that he was going to distribute. His plan was, I need to LoJack everybody who is a leader of these different peoples, because what I have coming, what I've got brewing in the basement, y'all aren't ready. And I love the imagery of Sauron and all of his armor with his Mason Morning Star when he comes out, because I was like, okay, that's bad. I love this. But even then, not understanding that a broken sword just happened to cut off a finger and it messed up his day. But for every plan that they made, they just didn't quite account for. But isn't it interesting, by virtue of the fact the wizard would not touch the ring?
Mm-mm.
The elves would not touch the one ring. Isildur is like, oh, look, it's a piece of jewelry.
Mine.
No, this looks cute. Doesn't it look fabulous? Dude, that's not yours. Not yours. Well, it's mine now. And all of this confusion continued. For a while, I was mad at the telling in the movie I was mad at Elrond because he was Peter Quill. Dude, they almost got the gauntlet off of Thanos. Why didn't you just snatch the ring, throw it in the fire, and this whole thing would be over? Throw it in. No. Dude, do something. And you just let him walk out. This is all your fault.
I think that's probably exactly what Elrond said at the time. Dude!
Dude,
What are you doing?
what are you
This is
thinking?
not what we're doing. It doesn't even go with your outfit. Just throw it away.
Amy just made a comment saying that we need Carol doing a version of the audiobooks. And I agree. Just in your version of events.
Yes.
I didn't know that I needed that in my life before.
But now that you've thought about it, you're like, where's my copy? Where can I get that? Yes, I'm here for it. I'm loving it.
But it's interesting that Tolkien, kind of pulling back to the original question that you were asking of, how Tolkien kind of pulled the dragons. It's interesting that dragon lore, how it kind of carried forth, and how it influenced. And as much, and giving a little bit of a sneak preview to Helen's religion and Tolkien and C.S. Lewis that we're going to record a little later, it's interesting, as much as Tolkien said, I'm not trying to put religion in my story, dude.
I'm glad you brought this up, Carol.
You're St. George. Give me a break. St. George and the bloody dragon. Come on. It's the St. Michael, smackdown with
Lucifer.
with Lucifer, Morning Star. Lucifer means light bringer. It's like, hey, Azor Ahai, let's have this fight. And, let's get ready to rumble. And no, that has nothing to do with any kind of Christian motifs. Yes, it does.
It does.
But I will say, within the Lord of the Rings, because in the telling of the Lord of the Rings, it's the third age and the dragons are gone. At that stage, the latter part of the third age. But at the middle part where the Hobbit is and there's a dragon, it's the classic story. We have to fight a dragon. And of all the things, the dwarves are like, yeah, Bilbo, you do it. He's like, I just came for the snacks. Why do I have to go fight a dragon?
Not only
you go
do
there.
they say, Bilbo, you do it, but they say, Bilbo, why don't you earn your 1/14 share of the treasure now?
And he's like, I've done all this other
He's
stuff.
already done all the heavy lifting, like the whole way.
Saved
Apart
you.
from the early parts
Got
of
you
Gandalf.
through the trolls. I got you through the tunnels.
I got you out of Mirkwood with the spiders.
It's like the list just goes on. It's like,
And
one more
on.
thing. Because that wasn't in the contract, but this is in the contract.
Yeah, we'll be renegotiating.
Dwarves are a stickler for a contract.
until it doesn't benefit them.
Right.
And then the argument ensues. But because if that were the case, Bilbo could have said, "That's not in my contract. That's not my part. Y'all fight with the dragons. I'll be out here. Okay, now I'll go in." And then they were, what kind of, and they kept saying, "What kind of a burglar are you? What's wrong with you? Where is he? Are you alive?" But it's that motif of the St. George fighting the dragon, of the crusade. It's the crusade. You're on a crusade. No, we're on an adventure. You're on a crusade. Right. But instead of you being the dragon slayer, you hired somebody to do it. And in the interest of full disclosure, you did tell him there was a dragon. You just omitted the rest of the information of what you wanted him to do. Mm-hmm. Or it was an ultra fine print. Oh, it was in moon runes, so he couldn't see it. But fighting even the battle with Glaurung, the battle with Smaug, the battle, all of this had to do with the heraldry of the crusade and of this higher purpose, this quest that we're on. And I don't know, it's a dragon.
Right.
It's either going to roast me and eat me, or it's just going to eat me and eat me.
It's a crusade from Thorin's point of view, for sure.
Because he's trying to get his home back.
And he keeps making these like epic speeches where he's like, there's a bit, just again, it's the same bit actually, where they're telling Bilbo to go in and go and get the treasure, go and take care of it. It's the same bit where Thorin makes this speech, and then the narrator like literally cuts him off and says, "By now you're quite familiar with Thorin's like speech making, and and we won't bore you with all the details." And then when you later learn that this is like Bilbo's retelling from a translation from the Red Book of Westmarch, it makes sense that the narrator just cuts off Thorin at this point, and he's like, "No, I'm done with this. Like, let's go. You get the picture with Thorin. He's very pompous. Let's go on with the story."
Mm-hmm. But it's interesting. I love that whole bit. And it's interesting because and now there's different ways that the dragons are handled. And we were talking earlier, Nessie, about I was doing research, and I love Beowulf. I read Beowulf in high school. I did a huge paper on it. Everybody thought I was nuts. I was like, "But
I mean, didn't we all? Didn't we all?"
I must say, this little pop-up book 3D thing that they did years back, if I could just burn all copies of that, I would. It was the worst thing ever. It's like, just keep it to the book. But
the movie? Are we talking about the movie?
Yeah, that movie, that 3D motion capture, whatever that was, it was horrible. But I'm just triggered again, having another Rankin Bass moment. But with regards to Beowulf and looking at this particular quest, Beowulf had fought Grendel and Grendel's mama.
Yeah.
And so he had destroyed these two beasts. And then someone else, and he was, leading the clan. And then someone says, "There's a dragon. You go kill it. You kill everything else." And he was over here like, "Can I just do me? Why do I have to do anything?" So Beowulf, in a way, reminded me a lot of Bilbo. Why do I have to kill the dragon? He kind of really didn't want to get into the fight that he got into, necessitating the death of Grendel and Grendel's mama. And there's some speculation that Grendel's mama and Beowulf had caves after dark, little tender moment, and the dragon was related. And I was like, I don't know about that. But the fight with Beowulf and this dragon reminded me of Luthien and Beren, because they were trying to get the Cimmerals back and trying to go through this similar kind of quest to recover and to win this battle, it cost Beowulf his life. But now he's martyred, and now he's this bigger than life, image. St. George is the same thing. Now, that has to be some allegory that was told. I don't think there was a dragon. St. George was a real person. I can't imagine there was a dragon running around that he slayed. But it was, okay, kill the dragon, get the princess.
Well, I mean, the story
the Hobbit is basically, I think of it as being the Beowulf story told from the thief's perspective, because that, I mean, we get this like character in Beowulf at the beginning who's just like he's an escaped slave, and he's a nameless character, isn't he? As far as I remember,
nameless, just a slave,
and he steals in through a secret passageway, and steals a cup. And then he sneaks off with it, and then the dragon goes nuts, and that's the start of the story.
Yeah, because the dragon is sitting on a hoard. Once again, dragons and hoards. And my statement in all of this is, if you know a dragon knows where his toenail clippers are under all of that, why do you want to go in there and poke the dragon? So the thief goes in, steals this, gets out, dragon's mad. And you're right, it is that story. And it's similar aspects of this dragon are more along the lines of, okay, we're going to now battle because you challenged me, because you've taken this one thing out of my hoard. With Smaug, it's the same thing, except he got called to the hoard, took it over, and now will defend it till the end of time. And dragons live long, slow, territorial lives. So if you're thinking you can wait the dragon out, good luck with that. So with Beowulf getting in the middle of this, it's, why am I fighting this? Why am I doing this? Why do I have to take on this task? It's these interesting, crazy quests that they end up on that inform their character and create their legends, if you will.
That's a good point, Carol. Dan, I think you had something that you were trying to say there just a second ago. What was that, John? Somebody
maybe
was about to make a point.
Well, you and I started speaking at the same time before, so I don't know if you had anything to add.
Oh, well, okay. So we're talking, about kingship when we're talking about Beowulf. Beowulf comes to the, Daneland because he hears about this monster that's been terrorizing this other king. So he's playing the hero at this point. He's making a name for himself. He's making his bones. He goes over the sea, takes care of business, and then heads on back home. Building on his legend, he ends up being a king in his own country. But it's not until the end of his life, the end of his reign, when he's, like they say, it's 50 years. 50 years is a long time back then. You live to be 50 and you're still, 50, 60, and you're still swinging a sword, man. You're doing great.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's the end of his life. It's kind of like the cycle of sovereignty, where, yes, it is the end of my, I have to go. I have to meet my obligations as a king. Because, see, Hrothgar could not meet his obligations as the king or the lord of the hall to protect his people. He had to have someone outside come do it. Yeah, and Beowulf is the king, and he's meeting his obligations to his people. So it says a lot about what kingship means. And even though he goes to the battle, he fights the battle, he doesn't live through the battle. Right. But his friend is there with him and is helping him in his quest, and who is eventually the one who's kind of like, he's making his bones, and he's, it's eventually the next leader of the people.
So I think in his dying breath, Beowulf says, Wiglaf, you're next. So here's the sword. Have fun with that. I'm now going to die.
Correct. And you kind of see that, like, in The Hobbit, where, Thorin doesn't make it through the battle, so, you've
this
got
whole line got wiped out.
So, it's like the end of, the king is dead, long live the king kind of thing. So, John, you've been very quiet during all of this. I'd like to hear.
Although I am waiting now for someone to bring up Leaf's question.
Yeah.
Oh,
I was gonna. She asked this about an hour ago, and I did actually see it then, and I was gonna bring it up, and then we didn't get to it.
Value.
Yeah.
This one. Okay. Well, John, go ahead.
Yeah, within the context of the story, I don't know, but I did find it really interesting reading up on the inspirations for Smaug, that Fafnir, is actually a dwarf who can change into a dragon. So that accounts for that dragon. Is obviously knowing the value of gold, and I think that kind of translates over to Tolkien's dragons. But as for an in-story explanation of why a dragon would know the value of gold, I can't quite give an explanation. Do you guys have thoughts on that?
I've got two thoughts on it. Number one, if evil wins, if Morgoth wins, who's going to run the banks in the New World Order when evil is taken over and the shadow covers all of Middle Earth? Who's going to run the banks? The dragons.
The dragons.
Yeah.
And their interest rates are hell, y'all.
Yeah.
Arm, leg.
Yeah. They'll just take a limb every time you make a withdrawal. And also, obviously, the more on a more serious note, the mythological underpinnings of the dragons being, at least Glaurung being inspired strongly by Fafnir, which we should tell that story, I think, in a moment. Whoever wants to take it. It's a shame Helen's not here because she's from Germany and she grew up with it. But
there are some influences too. St. George, I found. So we'll talk about that too.
With Glaurung.
Yeah, with Glaurung.
Yeah, sure. But as John said, Fafnir was a dwarf originally in Norse mythology and in the Germanic version as well. And my speculation would be that potentially dwarves were involved in the creation of the dragons, which we don't know too much about. It's a big mystery. But Morgoth couldn't create. He wasn't able to create. So when he created the dragons, he couldn't create a new life form. He had to take what was already created by Eru, the god of Ardar, and twist it and pervert it and create mockeries of it. And that's obviously, everybody probably knows the story of the orcs being created from the elves.
Right.
What did he take from the earth to create the dragons? Helen, when we talked about this with the Glaurung stream, she talked about the eagles and them being, the origins of the flying dragons. And maybe there was this R&D department eugenics thing that was going on where they just bred these scaly creatures out of snakes and eagles and cats and whatever else. But where did they get their kind of sapience from, their self-awareness would be my question. And I wonder whether it was from dwarves, and that is why there's these connections between the dwarves across history and why there's a lot of thematic similarities with the culture of the dwarves and the personalities of the dragons that we see. So that would be my answer. Quite long, I'm afraid, but
no, but it's interesting because then that would make dragons a chimera, because the wings are coming from an eagle, the long scaliness is coming from the snake, the sharp predator nature is coming from whatever type of feline-ish, wolvish characters, which eventually became wargs. Maybe wargs went into two directions, but that
and then throw a Balrog in there, and you've got the flame, the fire breathing aspect as well.
True. And then if you wanted to have snark, that's a dwarf, because dwarfs are pretty snarky. I'm thinking of Gimli telling off, the tree elves when, they were like, we haven't seen a dwarf since the elder days. You know what this dwarf has to say about that? And it's like, could you not? He started it, type of thing. So I could see that. And then the higher intelligence and just the evilness came from Morgoth himself, because I want to have things. And that single-mindedness came from both Morgoth and the dwarves. I like that. I think you're onto something, Dan.
Yeah, that especially drawing directly, from the Volsung saga, and the dwarves that were shapeshifters, which is a really cool concept, dwarven shapeshifters, because
Mhm.
all three of the brothers, if I remember correctly, of were shapeshifters.
Yeah,
One of them really pays for it early on.
yeah. One of them is an otter called Otter.
Yeah,
Conveniently,
starts the whole
Um,
thing,
and he gets killed accidentally by Loki.
Yeah, of
By,
course. It's Loki.
by Tom Hiddleston.
Always Loki.
Loki, of course.
Well, it's interesting because from a classical music standpoint, dealing with the Volsunga and Fafnir's Sigurd, which is Siegfried, Brumhilde, and all of that, that's the Ring. The music of the Ring, and of course, I have to do my obligatory. I think it's Merry Melodies. It might be Merry Melodies. I don't think it was Warner Brothers yet. With "Kill the Wabbit, Kill the Wabbit," because they did their riff on that. Which, if you've never seen that, find it, watch it. You will scream. It is beautifully done. It is gorgeously done. But
I don't think I know that reference. Can you link me to that somehow?
The what?
I think it's a night at the opera, I think is what it's called.
And everybody comes out as Leopold Stokowski, who is a really well-known composer and director of a conductor of classical music, and he does the Leopold thing, and he's conducting this opera and orchestra that are doing their riff on Wagner's The Ring, which is basically the Volsunga. And you've got
it's the Volsung Saga remixed, isn't it? It's very different, the Wagner opera.
But he kind of took some little bits and pieces in the Ring and kind of went that way. But it's really kind of funny when you listen to the music, because it's just perfect soundtrack for this whole thing, because it's just got that heraldry, and it's got the martialness, and it's got the it's like a it's like a rock opera. It's wonderful. But I just found that really interesting. But with Beowulf and the Germanic aspects of the dragon, it seems to fall and come through. And it's interesting as well, because in both Norse mythology and German mythology and English, aspects of mythology, this thing of this symbol of this dragon that needs to be overcome, conquered, and killed to show value and this highest quest to go upon. It's just interesting to me that this poor little dragon is just minding their business, hoarding their gold, and everybody keeps trying to come steal the gold, and hijinks ensue.
So, crickets.
Carol's full of poop.
I'm trying to get John to say something. He's just been so quiet.
You've been really quiet, man. The chat were accusing you of falling asleep.
Yeah, I know, which is hilarious, since I'm going to be actually doing that following the stream.
Amy had a question. I'll just put this a general question for the panel. So which one of Tolkien's dragons is your favorite, and why? And I'll go ahead and pick on John to start with.
Okay. Well,
I haven't heard enough.
Same favorite, or which one do we think is the most interesting?
It could be either way. Which one appeals to you the most? Which dragon speaks to you?
Shoot. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just Smaug, but it's almost not even because of him. It's just that I love that encounter between Smaug and Bilbo so freaking much, and it's because The Hobbit was, I always just go back to it being my original, introduction, as it is for most people, to Tolkien and just falling in love with the character of Bilbo and his personal journey, and the confrontation with Smaug is the sort of climax for his character. That's when he's taking that step into his own bravery, and it's just so great the way they're kind of going back and forth, and Smaug, you have to be careful with him, as with many dragons, where you can give more information than you intend to, and you have to be really careful. But then that's also why I find Glaurung to be really, really interesting, because that's a darker tale, and so his words are very dangerous, and there's all that tragedy laced with it, where there's a lot of bite, no pun intended, to his words, and
Great.
yeah, and so I don't know, but it's Smaug at the end of the day, just because that's such a quintessential chapter, I think, and I love the sort of the carryover from the encounter with Gollum, where Bilbo is playing the riddle game, and he's trying to pull the same stuff with Smaug, but he's dealing with someone who is, I dare say, I don't know, I guess it's a matter of opinion, but you could argue is very much smarter than him, and is, I don't think Bilbo's completely on his guard, and he does slip up, and
he does pretty well though, Bilbo.
Yeah, all things considered, he does pretty well. But
and it did him in,
I mean,
because
he's got that
comfortable.
advantage of being invisible, of course, but but he does pretty well overall. Again, I'll reference the stream that I did with Helen about Glaurung, because we noticed a parallel actually with Bilbo and Finduilas in the Children of Húrin story, where Finduilas was she was an elf who sorry, not Finduilas, the sister Neonor.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. Starting to get tipsy. So Neonor is Turin Turambar's sister, and she goes to Nargothrond, which I mentioned earlier, to see Glaurung, and she confronts the dragon, and he puts her in his spell and routes her to the spot, and they have this conversation, and it's very similar actually to the Smaug conversation with Bilbo. But she manages to give away like who she is, and she gives away the whole game, because she comes under his spell, whereas Bilbo is more resistant.
Well, he's not able, because Smaug is not able to like look him in the eyes and fascinate him and capture him with his gaze, like Glaurung is able to do with Neonor. They don't have that mesmerism, factor going on. So he is able to kind of like resist him, because, they're not able to play up that. What I liked a lot about the Glaurung story was when he is roosted up in Nargothrond. It talks about how he would create these vapors, these mists, these vapors, and foul vapors. And that to me is just really speaking about how his words were poison. He had these foul vapors, coming out of his mouth. So that's
I would say magical evil farts personally, but
and that, well, there's that, yeah, but foul vapors, yeah. But that kind of was like pulled, to me, it was pulled directly from the St. George and the Dragon story, because that how the dragon was hiding himself. He was in a lake, okay, but he was creating these misty, poisonous, foul vapors all around the area. So it's not a fire-breathing dragon, but kind of like he breathes poison, so to speak, just poisons the area around him, which is kind of like a D&D thing, and Stephen would tell you that. But
and it's also, I may not be able to fly, but if I can insert an earworm and get you caught in. My words can sow confusion and paranoia like Morgoth. Because if Morgoth got in your ear, that's what happened to Feanor. Morgoth was in Feanor's ear. He was in the Noldorim's ears, stirring them up. When he was supposed to be on parole because he had been locked up, they correctly or incorrectly, his brethren were like, "No, let him out. He's sorry." No, leave him where he is. And they brought him out, and he tried to be well behaved, but he very carefully, quietly, insidiously wove these words, and these words were poison. And it's like worm tongue, the things that he was saying to beguile and to influence and to sway the words. Because some people would say, be careful of your advisors, because if you're not confident, your advisor will manipulate you to get their agenda out there. You have the power, but they are the driver behind it. So exactly, the St. George's dragon was, okay, I may not fly, but you're going to know a dragon's here. And if you're going to come in here and do battle with me, then it's on. With Smaug, it was sign outside on the door, here be dragon, go away.
Sorry.
So we're not even going to have this whole conversation. No vapors, no mist, none of that. I'm just going to hang a sign on the door, or I'll just cross out dwarves and put Smaug, mine. So if you come in here, you understand that the 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 danger that you're putting in, you own it. So Bilbo kind of feeling kind of good, to your point, where he was working with trying to work with Gollum. Gollum, however, was totally addicted. That was a perfect junkie story, because he's in his little place. He's looking at you as a snack. I'm not trying to really help you. You look different. I don't know what it is about you that's familiar, but you're different than the local goblins I've been eating and these cold fish. So we'll do this riddle, because he was manipulating you, thinking that he could out riddle you, and then you'd lose, he'd eat you, and all's good. With Smaug just had that confidence and patience, because this dragon had been on this earth how many years, and how many people, and how many dragons had come before him. Unlike Glaurung, who got out of the yard before he was ready, Smaug was a dragon formed, in his power. And someone had asked the question, do Tolkien dragons have magic? I would say they do, in their beguilement.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have a strong will, you could get sucked into that. So if you think about it, it probably was for the best that the dwarves sent Bilbo in. And I'm wondering if they knew that, because Smaug wouldn't have known what a hobbit was. And he said, "Who are your, I don't think I've smelled you before." The dwarves were like, "Well, he will recognize our smell." But I'm wondering if there's some dwarvish lore that said, um, in a game of words, did dwarves ever win? Were there other encounters where dwarves were trying to battle a dragon? Maybe they came across a dragon on a horde from somewhere else. Hey, let's snatch that. Encountered this dragon, tried to battle it. They all get eaten. And it goes down in dwarves history. That's not a tactic you want to use. But I think their power had to be in their understanding their strengths and understanding their opponent's weaknesses, bar none. But I'm a Smaug girl, ride or die. I go with Smaug.
I think Gandalf, at least, very much, it knew that going in, which is why he enlists Bilbo, because he even has that line, "The scent of a hobbit is all but unknown to him." At least that's it in the film. I'm not sure if it's the same in the book, but
it's very similar.
Yeah, so I think that that's something in the back of his mind, definitely, whether the dwarves are thinking about that or not.
I couldn't
Yeah.
imagine poor Bilbo, who had gone through all those trials on his quest or their quest. He was, hired for this quest to sit in a room with something the size of Hobbiton, because I don't believe Smaug was the size of Ankagalon. I'm not sure, like, who was the biggest,
No, he was much,
but
much smaller.
it was a big dragon.
Yeah.
Which just
And
makes
for a hobbit,
which
Go for
just
it.
makes the Peter Jackson's directive to make Smaug as big as humanly possible even more hilarious, because then you're like, well, what on earth did the bigger
How
dragon
big-
look like?
This is a small one. What the heck do the giant dragons of old look like? Oh my god! So yeah, just for scale, man. That's
Just for
no pun
scale.
intended.
Well,
just for scale. That's
for
crazy.
reference, and Calagon the Black, who was the boss fight at the end of the Silmarillion, I call him. When he dies, he falls from the sky and he collapses on the mountain fortress of Thangorodrim, which is the kind of like the main stronghold of Melkor, Morgoth. And he like the whole mountain falls down around him when he falls on it.
Like he's collapsing a mountain chain.
And this is the biggest like stronghold in the history of Middle Earth. This makes Barad-dûr look like, like an outbuilding.
And
outhouse.
and flattened it. It's interesting because I remember posting. It was one of those, who would win in this battle, Smaug or Drogon, and someone had posted, and it was beautiful. It was a YouTube comparison, and if I find it, I'll send it, of which were the biggest dragons, and there were dragons bigger than Balerion, the Black Dread. So where would you slot in Tolkien dragons with Martin dragons, with Lorish dragons? And to your point, John, if Smaug, which was that big, was considered a small dragon, and there's no way that Ankakalon would fit in the Lonely Mountain because he was that much bigger. So if this was a big dragon to, local time, if Ankakalon had lived, that would have been a thing to behold. I would like to see a pictorial of that. Maybe we can get somebody has done that comparison as to who was bigger and what was that sizing.
Yeah, I have seen a graphic that is like kind of like a graph of like scale drawing of the dragons before, but I don't know how canon it is because I don't know whether we've got descriptions of how big all of them are. But Smaug is roughly like half, like in Tolkien's kind of estimation of Smaug, he's roughly half the size of what he was in the movie, so he is a bit smaller than what some people have in their heads.
I'm wondering if the fact that they were, once Melkor was defeated, and he wasn't like feeding and like powering up these dragons, in the pits, if that was why Smaug didn't grow to be as big as some of the other dragons, even though he had reached about the same age and in size. I mean, do you think it's because he didn't have that influence, that constantly feeding of power, that to make the dragon grow bigger?
There's a book called Morgoth's Ring, which is it's one of the Histories of Middle Earth series, which is kind of posthumously released essays and notes and stories, and it's Silmarillion based, so it's kind of stuff that was left on the cutting room floor of the Silmarillion editing process by Christopher. In a way, sort of. I don't know if that's the right description, but basically the idea of Morgoth's Ring is that Morgoth had a ring, and the ring was Middle Earth itself. So in the same way that Sauron pours his power and his essence into the One Ring when he creates the One Ring, Morgoth actually depowered himself when he put his power out into the Balrogs and the dragons and to the orcs and everything else. His maintenance of the standing army like actually depowered his own personal
because he was
martial strength
sending that out into his like emissaries or his lieutenants or his creations. He's putting a bit of himself into all these things.
His corruption of the world of Ardo, lessens himself because he's putting himself into the world. So when he dies, that's not happening anymore. Because Calagon has to be younger than Smaug actually, because he's not that old. The whole first age is about 600 years. So
and they were like the fire drakes, kind of like the flying ones were all released during the Battle of Flame, correct? Or was it the dagger?
No, it was in the War of Wrath when the
War of Wrath, yeah.
When they were all released. That's the big battle at the end. And Erendil shows up with his flying ship, and he's got the Silmaril, and he's God knows how, but he manages to kill Calagon in a battle that takes an entire 24 hours.
He found his weak spot, just like the lake guy, just like the man from Dale. He found that one little spot. A little bird told him where to shoot.
The thrush.
Yeah, the thrush.
The thrush was busy.
In the Hobbit, it's literally that a little bird told him. It's wonderful. I love it.
Yeah, that was really cute. That was really cool. A little bird told him. Okay, guys. Well, we're coming down around to the end. If there's, we got about 10 minutes left. If you guys want to give your final thoughts, is there anything you want to make sure that you say before, we sign off? Any points you'd like to make? Any links? Any references? Just now is your time. If the chat has any questions.
Did you guys go through the story of Fafnir?
Not completely, no. I mean, we didn't talk about any mythology stuff really until you turned up.
Okay.
All you.
Yeah, you were here for that.
We didn't go through
All
it in
you,
depth.
John. All you.
No, I was just, we're running low on time now, but I just loved, because my knowledge of that stuff is pretty much from the music side of Wagner's Ring. So I wasn't exactly knowledgeable in some of the details of the story, but I just love the fact that, as payment for killing the king's son, it's naturally treasure that's offered in exchange, and
it was a thing, there was a gold price. It was the blood price that you paid instead of, you were sent to prison or whatever. You could pay the Were Guild, the honor price of that particular person in society. So the prince, the king's son, you're worth a whole dragon horde. Go kill the dragon to get it. But go ahead, John. Go ahead.
Yeah, and then there's a ring, of course.
Yeah.
And it's an object of corruption, and
Right.
the king, wants it anyway, and it's, and then you have the whole, and then that leads to the brothers sort of turning against one another. The father's killed. All this stuff. It's like that is Gollum and the Ring. That's and I love that, and I never really, and this is what I was talking about earlier, I never really knew the fact that Fafnir was a dwarf who could turn into a dragon. And as we were talking about before, this makes so much sense with the connection between dwarves and dragons in Tolkien stories. And I don't know, I just found that really extremely interesting. And of course, the way Sigurd sort of lays in wait and kills Fafnir, it's
exactly like Tyrion Turambar.
Yeah, exactly. And I just,
it's slightly different in that he digs a trench in the Volsung saga, and then he collects the blood of the dragon in the trenches.
Dragon blood.
Dragon.
It's weird.
And then as he's dying, he's got his poisonous words.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. So yeah, it was really cool to go back and learn about that story.
The Children of Hurin story is actually, it's a mashup between Fafnir and Sigurd, and also the Tale of Kullervo from the Finnish, what's it called? I've forgotten. There's a Finnish folk tale, but it's the Tale of Kullervo, which Tolkien did a translation of. And the whole kind of Romeo and Juliet subplot with him marrying his sister and knocking her up and everything, that's taken from that.
And then I love that also, then the way that part of the story ends, you have Sigurd who gets some of the dragon's blood, and it gives him the ability to speak to the birds who are messengers and from Odin, and they warn him, they tell him of the brothers' intentions, and so it's again with the birds, so it's just great to read all this. It made me want to dive in deeper and learn more about the saga. So
yeah, I would like to learn the Germanic version a bit better, because I know the Norse version, but I don't really know the Germanic version. And I asked Helen about it, but she was going off memory, so it came out a bit garbled when we talked about it. But yeah, it's interesting. There's two versions that are both, from history. The name I was trying to think of was the Kalevala. She's the Finnish folktale, which is where the whole thing about the children of Hurin and Nienor and Turin comes from.
Yeah, I think that's one of the few Tolkien books that I actually don't have in my possession. I need to fix that.
Indeed.
It'll be on Amazon tonight.
I don't know if it's actually in print, his translation of it, but I've got an ebook of it, which you can have if you want. It probably is in print. I don't know.
Now, the funny thing is that if you look at these messages of, why is a dragon always cast as evil? Why is the dragon always cast as this serpent goes? And this is the last topic that you had on our agenda for today.
Western. Yeah, it's a very Western concept.
Definitely a very Western concept. But even when you go through religious texts to try to figure out where the commonalities are, there is this common theme of this war that went down between God and the angels, and which is very much the story of Melkor and Morgoth, and he himself did not choose to turn himself, because again, he can't create anything. So that was the impetus for him to work and create his weapon of vengeance, and creating these dragons and creating all these dark beings that he was able to corrupt, all of which being intensely intelligent, but very narrow of focus, which reflected the creator. But when you look at the combined mythos of Lucifer, why he was cast as a red dragon, that's an interpretation that kind of comes from different things. The serpent, the dragon, the words, the corrupting Adam. What in the birth of that is the creation of sin. That was Lucifer and his sin of pride and of choice. So with Melkor, he had pride and he created corruption and kept feeding it. So when he died, the echoes of that continued. Sauron picked those echoes up. But, as I said before, Sauron apparently didn't have the ability that Melkor had to imbue that influence and those poison words to get people to do his bidding or to take them astray. So he created these rings and put all of that in the rings, and again to lowjack all these people and to take them off their path.
Yeah, where Melkor used his mind and his words, that's where Sauron would use his intellect and um, his strategy.
Technology.
Ingenuity,
He used
I'd say.
technology. He created technology that would amplify um, the malice and the corruption and whatnot. How the
Already
and
there.
he knew the beings. Like he knew men, the creation of men. He knew the elves. He knew the dwarves. He knew all of those beings, and it's almost as if he uh, added customized corruption into this device that would over time corrupt the dwarves, the elves, and the men. So the question becomes: the elves also had the three rings. It didn't quite do the same with them, but it diminished their power. So was that the intent? We're going to diminish your power on this earth. With the dwarves, maybe it made them even more isolated. And with men, he was able to take them to do his bidding. So you wonder if there was some intent and then the one ring to rule them all.
Well, I didn't think that the three ring. Go ahead, John. You had something to say
No,
about the
I
three.
was just going to comment on what Aaron was saying in the post. Is yeah, Dan, I was a bit taken aback too, and I thought she was saying that the only book she had was the Tale of Kalervo. I was like, really? So, so
We know differently.
that makes more sense that it's the Children of Hurin, which I do have, of course.
Yeah, you did a stream on it, didn't you? Not too long ago.
Yeah, with Helen. So. But actually, I did want to mention, Carol, this is backtracking a little bit, but you did mention how Tolkien's, dragons are evil, and that's a predominant thing. And actually, in the documentaries on The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug, they actually even talk about how dragons over time had become more sort of cutesy and and friendly, and Tolkien was very much more interested in the dragons of old that were fearsome, and
Yes.
and so him going back to those older tales and the way dragons were presented before was very much a conscious thing for him. He wanted to bring that back. So yeah, that's definitely a big point of his dragons, and that's influenced, of course, what we've seen since then, because that's sort of the model that's been followed. Dragons are fearsome creatures, so I think if he wanted to bring that back, he was very much successful.
He was very successful. And to your point, that is true. I think Tolkien even commented that, or Christopher Tolkien commented that everything was getting gentrified and made precious. So you had this Puff the Magic Dragon, and you had, gentle, kind dragons that sang to the damsel in the tower, and she wrapped flower garlands around their head, and you pat them on the head, and they're so cute. But these are highly intelligent, highly focused, highly dangerous creatures. Back to Nessie's point about a cat is much less on the domestication evolutionary scale than a dog. Domesticated dogs are so far down that road. You've got cats that really aren't that far down, birds even less so. So
Snakes,
people
not
not
even like. Yeah.
not close. They're not even close. And people tend to anthropomorphize animals to make them cute and huggable and squeezable and all those kinds of things. I will hug him and squeeze him and call him George. That's great. But that thing will eat you. Respect where it is. And I like the fact that Tolkien said, no, let's get back to the way this was so we can have that challenge and have that respect and have that, aspect. I'm wondering, there's so many Christian tropes within what he wrote, and you can, doing this research for this stream, it was like, oh yeah, there's this and there's that, and I had done other religious polls for the stream I'm going to do with Helen, but I like the fact that Tolkien touched on it, but he didn't beat you over the head with it. if I don't know if you're fans of C.S. Lewis, but if you read C.S. Lewis is on the other side.
Right.
Very clear God,
Mm.
devil, repentance, betrayal.
Yeah, I'm not a fan personally.
He's very and it was funny because Tolkien and CS used to have these arguments about that's not high fantasy. There's a street lamp. There's no electricity. Get this out of
I
here.
was wondering if somebody was going to bring this up because I hear
So
their arguments
they
were like,
argued a lot, and I just found it awesome. So we're gonna kind of deal with some of that in that stream with Helen, especially on the a little bit on the high fantasy side, some of their friendship. But
Yeah, I have
Tolkien,
to come to accept the reading the Chronicles of Narnia, that aspect of it, and in general, maybe this is a little unfair of me, but when I read my high fantasy, usually I do like that separation. It does tend to bug me a little bit when real world elements come in, which is why I remember when I was reading his Dark Materials back years ago. And if I had been paying attention, I would have realized this from the get-go, but it becomes very obvious when you start the second book that this is a story in which our world intersects with a fantasy world. And I remember being quite put off by it at the time. I was like, I don't want this. Give me the fantasy world.
Well, it's almost like the anti-Narnia, though. It's like his Dark Materials is almost written as a response to C.S. Lewis. And Philip Pullman talks about C.S. Lewis quite a lot.
I think if CS had done what Lewis Carroll did, who was the generation before them, they're born in the same century, but Lewis Carroll was much earlier in that century. He wrote it as this farcical fairy tale that you see what happens, you end up in this new world, and it spoke to choice, it spoke to things, it spoke, and I love Lewis Carroll's work. When you get to C.S. Lewis, it was so I'm trying to beat you over the head with almost like taking St. George, but making it so precious and so cutesy. And then you have Tolkien, who's like, no, I'm trying to do something for England. We don't really have quite the same mythology that the Norse do, that the Germans do, that the English do, that the Romans do. And I really want to create that fantasy that could be directly correlated to England. It could have happened to the maps and the language and all of these things. C.S. Lewis was telling a children's story that, funnily enough, because even Helen said it, that if as a kid reading fantasy, I was more geared towards the Brothers Grimm and those stories than I was to anything that was ever so cutesy, because the ever so cutesy was almost pre-digested and it was taking you on this journey. It didn't allow you to become part of the story. And Tolkien definitely had his very much, framework that he put into place of where he was trying to go. But he did in The Lord of the Ring remove the religious aspects out of it. The Silmarillion very much deals with it in the beginnings of before First Age, in the dark, when Eru was creating everything. His Valar were very much the seven angels, the messengers of God, Michael of which being the one that was either the healer or the warrior. So when Eru created, the Valar, it was everybody has a role, you need to do these things. You can kind of see those things there. But CS kind of he just covered it in too much syrup and sugar and sweet. And it was too transformational in a wrong way. There were aspects of it that were really good, but it was, I don't know if I would classify it as high fantasy. And I know people will be throwing stuff at me in the chat, but I never classified it as high fantasy, where Tolkien's was.
It's interesting. I don't know how you would define high fantasy. I mean,
Well, sort of like what
I would make the
Tolkien
distinction
said,
of
there won't be a street lamp. There won't be this so close.
because of the sort of the like the trying to think of the right term, but the modern world things in there.
Correct.
There's little bits of Tolkien that are like that too, though, as well, isn't there? Like in the narration, at least, there's a bit where they reference like a steam train, I think, in the Lord of the Rings, like as a metaphor, as a simile, or whatever. There's like little bits of like stuff in there that's kind of.
And the same with religion. There are tropes that are there. There are certain aspects of the
main distinction that I would draw is that C.S. Lewis is like directly allegorical in its like synthesis of the stories, and whereas Tolkien is like kind of drawing from sources, but he's telling his own story and weaving his morality into it.
Indeed. So
the creation myth is a little bit like Genesis. You can't sort of shy away from that too much, but it's also very, very different as well, because the Valar aren't directly angels. They're aspects of the one God. So it's kind of like it's more like I'd say it's more like something like Zoroastrianism, where which is a Persian religion, which is kind of like it's different because that's dualistic. Yeah, you're right, but that also has this concept of something a bit like the Valar from Tolkien, where there's aspects which are called emanations of the one God. Which I was researching this recently for a video, which I'm planning on dropping on my channel at some point, about links between George R.R. Martin and Tolkien, because this was a religion that George was influenced by. And I decided not to include this, but Tolkien, like his cosmogony isn't necessarily exactly like Judeo-Christianity, is it?
No, it is not.
There's definitely a bit of a Garden of Eden sort of feel to the early chapters of the Silmarillion, but it's not exactly the same.
And then also, to be fair, the Silmarillion was composed, constructed, and released by Christopher, who was putting it together based on the notes and the things that had been collected in, I just pictured this beautiful old ornate trunk of all of his notes and works and whatever that J.R.R. had, and then Christopher, as this effort and labor of love, wrote this very much in the style of his father, but with the interpretation from the son. So this one definitely has the roots of all of that research, but in some of the telling, it's interpreted, and you can feel that. But I agree with you. The Silmarillion is much closer to that Genesis tale in the very beginning, and then it drifts away from it. Whereas C.S. Lewis very much anchors his story in Judeo-Christian text and themes, and carries it on. Because even the brother who plays Judas and told on them to the White Queen, and ends up, and then the older daughter who loses her disbelief, she grows up. So the two oldest children who are no longer, it's like Peter Panism. Once you become a grown-up, you no longer can see this anymore. You can't come back. Whereas the youngest daughter is able to, because she's much younger. Very much talks about people, how they lose their faith and lose their way because maybe they start interpreting things a little differently. C.S. Lewis, my opinion, was a little heavy-handed with telling that particular story, whereas I think it was influencing Tolkien. It's very much a part of who he is, having survived World War I. I think you're going to find a lot of religion in a foxhole. I think the Dead Marshes, which is in The Lord of the Rings, is direct reflection of being in a foxhole, being bombarded, rain coming, the foxholes filling up with water, and his dead friends face up in those holes. So there's influences there, but he's not beating you over the head with it like Lewis does. Lewis very much is into preaching in his tale, Where
the Dead Marshes is the Battle of the Somme, and Tolkien did say that. It's that influence is in there.
so you can feel his real life influencing his work. Like you said before, there's an influence there, but it's not, so much pounding on top of it.
All right, guys. Well, I think that should about wrap it up. Did anybody else have anything they wanted to say or get in before the end? There was a point in the chat made that I wanted to pull that up since you're talking about Narnia, was that if you'd like to read a set of books like very much in the flavor of Narnia, but without being beaten over the head with all the religious aspects, you might want to read the series of books called The Magicians. I think Aaron mentioned that earlier in the chat. They did make a television show out of it, which I haven't read the books. I did watch the show. The show's great. And it has a lot of those same through the looking glass or through the clock, in this case, instances where you open the door into another realm and you could be kicked out of it as well. So it's definitely heavily based on the C.S. Lewis books. So if you're interested in something a little bit,
I would also say though, I guess the panel is not the biggest fans, and certainly they're not. I wouldn't say they're my favorite books either. But if you haven't read the Chronicles of Narnia, by all means, do read them. Because I enjoyed my experience of reading those books, even though I was quite a bit older than the target audience at the time that I did. So don't be scared off. I still say they're worth reading. Yeah,
I think they're important and worth reading, but read them with a critical eye, because they are quite problematic in some ways. They're quite racist as well in parts. I find some elements. And they do beat you over the head with the religion stuff. And there's also the last book. I read them when I was very young, and when I read the last book, I got quite upset by them because the way they treat one of the characters, because she's started to go through puberty and started getting interested with boys and stuff. And the last book of the Chronicles of Narnia is it's basically like a Revelation, and she doesn't get into the analog of heaven because of the fact that she's started getting into boys and things and started taking care of her appearance, makeup and stuff.
I think it's the oldest daughter.
I don't remember which character it was. It's been years since I've read them, like literally decades.
Well, that's the thing. You age out.
Exactly. That's it. Because the oldest boy and the oldest girl, they're princes in the land of the realm of Narnia, but once they do get to a certain age, they are aging out because it's a children's story.
Yeah, Mike is
rather than high fantasy.
Mike is saying the Calor men in Narnia. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, definitely. Yikes. Yeah, that's the right word.
Yikes. Okay, guys. Well, thank you so much for coming, sharing your knowledge, sharing your wealth with us today. Not being greedy little dragons and hoarding all your knowledge. So, John, tell us what's coming up for you and your channel.
Okay, so let's see. So I'm actually off tomorrow, which worked out good because I have to work tomorrow during that time, which is the first time in a while. So it worked out really good. But next Thursday, I'm going to be watching the Terry Gilliam film Brazil, I won't be watching it on the air, while we're doing this, but I'll be talking about it with Sanri, and you guys don't want to miss that because it's going to be great. And this will actually be my first time seeing the film. So who knows? Maybe I won't like it, and you guys will get what you've always wanted.
There's a film you haven't seen?
Yeah, I know, but I'm sure I'll love it because I love everything, right?
You love everything.
So definitely tune in for that. Actually, God, I keep saying it's on Thursday. It's not going to be on Thursday. That's my standard time, because Sanri is not going to be available at the usual time slot. I believe we're doing it on Wednesday in the evening. I need to nail down a specific time, but I will let you guys all know about that.
Definitely evening for her.
Yeah. So
I think we leave at 6 o'clock.
yeah. So yeah, that's what I have coming up, and yeah, I'll be going every 2 weeks for the time being. So I'm still setting up the next one, but I'll let you guys know what's coming after that.
All right, Dan, how about you? What's going on with your channel? You got a lot of stuff coming out.
Yeah, I've got loads of things that I'm working on. I'm continuing on with the Silmarillion series. I'm up to chapter 3, which is the chapter about the awakening of the elves. So it's a good chapter. It's an interesting one. It's about the genesis and birth of a race, and about their subsequent migration west. It's one of the chapters that people who are first time readers to the Silmarillion struggle with, because there's a lot of like taxonomy of the different groups of the elves and the different clans and how they split up over the ages, and so I'm going to have my work cut out in trying to explain that and break it down in a sensible way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm writing the script for that now, so I'm going to carry on writing after this, actually. And yeah, I will be still appearing on Helen's channel. We've got a stream coming up at some point in the next coming weeks about the Witch King of Angmar, which will be live. And I also am going to be doing book reviews. So I've got a book which I'm going to review for a Tolkien scholar called John Garth, who has just written a book which is it's basically about the world building of Tolkien, and it is biographical as well. So it's about what places he's visited in real life, and some of his different sources and things that he's inspired by. A really good book, which I'm still only halfway through, but I'm going to be reviewing that on my channel. And yeah, that's about it for me, I think.
Oh, that's a pretty good schedule.
Actually, there's one more thing. I'm also working on something which I don't know whether it's going to happen yet or not, but I'm working on something for Geek Chat 1, which is their convention that they're doing. I'm going to be doing something Star Trek for that, hopefully.
Oh, nice.
That's in the planning stages. So I don't know how that's going to end up looking, but I'm talking with one of the moderators there about that. So I'll keep people posted on that.
Yeah, that's coming up pretty soon.
Yeah, it's in about a week and a half. So we're just starting to actually properly talk about it in the last couple of days, even though we've been talking about it for about a month. We've suddenly, last minute, starting to actually do stuff.
Funny how it just sneaks up on you like that. Yeah. Okay. Carol, what about you, hon? You got anything in the works?
Just saying, working with Helen, we are trying to schedule and record our religion in comparison between C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, how they apply that, how it influences or not their work, their friendship, their hecklements, because they had a tendency to heckle each other from time to time. Well, they're very good friends, but their approach to writing their books was a little different. And whether people may or may not know it, but C.S. Lewis actually was the person who encouraged Tolkien to do his work, to publish it.
Yeah.
He thought it was a little bit maybe too niche-y, or maybe it was just for him. And C.S. Lewis was like, "Nah, man, jump out there, do it." And it was just the best thing ever that was done. And then, the usual moderating on the different channels, Smoke Screen and Because.
Yeah. All right, and I'll
You're
finish
also
up.
you're also working on that audiobook, right?
Yeah, the requested audiobook, please, and thank you.
That is hilarious.
Yep. So I've got another stream lined up in 2 weeks. We're gonna continue with the Magical Menagerie, and I've got the fabulous Alicia Kingston, who's going to come on, and we're going to be talking all about the Sphinx and the riddles and everything like that. So we'll see you guys again in 2 weeks. And until then, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Goodbye, and see you next time.
Bye.